Hello, it is Wednesday. I'm your host, Brian Friedman. This is The View from the Top, and we are live. And we've got such an important subject to be talking about today. Today, we are going to be talking about immigration in the new environment. This is such an important issue around the world. People are wondering what is going on, how the world is changing. We're seeing presidential conferences, we're seeing press conferences, we're seeing meetings between world leaders, we're seeing executive orders. There is just so much going on in the world. So we've got people coming in from all over the world, which is lovely, and we're looking forward to seeing you and getting you involved in the conversation. You know how it works, everybody. Join in the conversation, write in the comments box, tell us who you are, where you are, what's going on. We really want to have those conversations with you. We are available on YouTube, we are available on LinkedIn, and also as a podcast, we are available on Spotify. So you can find us in lots of different places out there. We also have CPE codes. Our CPE codes are all here. You can get them from ERC, you can get them from SHRM, you can get them from HRCI. So here are the codes. We'll leave them up there. So many thanks to our really good friends at Worldwide ERC for giving us the CPE codes. Many thanks to our good friends at Rocket Mortgage for helping us with the codes with HRCI and with SHRM. So that's all that's been going on. We have got an amazing group of people. We've got Julia Onslow-Cole talking to us about a global immigration update. Then we've got Devika from H&M, we've got Nicole from Kroll, and we've got Eddie from Fragman in DC, and they will be talking to us very much about US immigration and what's going on in the new environment in the US, both from a legal point of view and indeed from a very hands-on practical perspective. So we've got all that. Before that, we've got the wonderful Julie Barron giving us a tax update, and she's going to be focusing on Russia. So again, very topical at the moment. And then to top it all, we have Cara Butler, our very own Cara Butler from Benevo, talking about some wonderful new immigration management technology. So we do have a great show lined up for you today, and then next week we've got another great show. We're going to be talking about VIP services. We're going to be talking about how you marry world-beating technology with a white glove hand-holding service to create a whole new game-changing model for executive relocation. So that's next week. So do make sure you tune into that. Meanwhile, let's find out what's been going on in the wonderful world of global mobility over the last 7 days. So let's see what the news has been. So there we have it. Amazing amount of breaking news going on, and there's so much geopolitical news going on too. Even I speak, it's flashing up on my screen that Donald Trump has just called Zelensky a dictator and says he better hurry or he won't have a country left. That literally just came up on my screen right now as we are talking. So much breaking news, and who better to give us a real breaking news update from a geopolitical perspective than the one and only, the wonderful Julia Onslow-Cole. So Julia, she's going to be on stage, so you know how it works. Everybody hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's welcome to our stage Julia Onslow-Cole. welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Where about in the world are you today?
I'm in Dubai and I'm about to go to Saudi.
Cool. Okay. Well, lots happening in that region, and obviously a lot happening in the new immigration environment. And that's going to be the theme of the rest of our show. But Julia, you just kick off. Just tell us a bit about what's going on with immigration in the new environment.
Yes. Well, I'm so excited, Brian, that we've got Eddie here today because he is a real guru on everything to do with US immigration. So it'll be really good to hear what he's got to say in a moment, and also to hear from Nicole and Davika about how they're managing all the challenges and opportunities that are coming from this new immigration landscape in the US and all the global developments. So on the global side, just wanted to mention 2 or 3 highlights that have really happened since we talked last week. So the first has been all of the discussions regarding a potential settlement of the war in Ukraine. And we've seen these meetings in Brussels and Paris with the European Council and Commission and the NATO Secretary General. And Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, has played a really key role in these discussions in Europe. And then we also saw this meeting in Riyadh yesterday, and that was between the US and Russia, but President Zelensky wasn't represented, and neither was Europe. Now, the US administration have made it very clear that they want to pull back from NATO, certainly as regards funding. And this whole question of what the US might do in relation to any peacekeeping exercise that's part of a post-settlement agreement, or in fact coming to the aid of any European nation that is potentially attacked by Russia in the course of such operation, all of that is really up in the air. And as you know, there's a lot of disagreement in Europe about whether Europe should form a unified army, or how they can raise funds to replace the US funds that they will be losing because of the US pulling back on their funding. The talks in Saudi were just a starting point. We had a readout from the talks in Riyadh yesterday, but the US administration has said they really hope that there will be a settlement in the next few months. Now, the key point, and the reason that I'm trying to summarize what's happening globally for all of our listeners on Benevo, is that this all has an impact on corporate strategies, which has an impact on global mobility strategies. So if there is an acceptable settlement for both sides in the next couple of months or 3 or 4 months, and the US and likely the Europe will lift sanctions, even though this morning, we've seen Europe put on increased sanctions, those sanctions will almost certainly be lifted in the US and in Europe if there is a settlement. Which means for global mobility, companies will be thinking, and I know they are already, about what to do with their market in Russia. And I know companies are thinking, should we be going back to Russia? Obviously, no one's, a lot of companies left Russia.
Absolutely. All the conversation was about taking people out of Russia. And now
exactly. So the whole point of me trying to point to these geopolitical milestones is just to get thinking about what your company strategy might be, what mobility impacts that might be. And then I wanted to just say a couple of things about the war with Israel and Hamas. Obviously, everybody's heard of President Trump, which is called to depopulate the territory, but there are a lot of talks going on with, I know it's Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, the UAE, and they're developing their own plan, which is an alternative plan to rebuild Gaza. But the final point I just want to say, and I hit on this last week, there's been a proliferation of trade agreements, really unbelievably, in terms of the number, the intensity, the pace, where different countries have got together and said, well, look, let us make trade agreements. So President Zelensky was here, actually, where I am in Dubai. Well, I think he was in Abu Dhabi as well in the last couple of days. he was finalizing a trade agreement between the UAE and Ukraine. Last week, I told you all about the Latin American agreements, the Mercosur one, the Mexico one with Europe. And India and France have been discussing an amazing plan which would be building a trade route to imitate China Belt and Road Initiative, and it would connect India to Europe and the Middle East through this whole network of roads and ports. So I just want to say that because, again, that's something you need to think of. Your company will think of it. Global Mobility will think of it. And in all of these trade agreements, there's always some exception given, some preference on mobility. So finally, just to say, stay close to the news. It's really important for strategy and mobility. And I hope this is a helpful little update.
Julia, a fascinating update. The world is changing at a pace that I think none of us had predicted. And we are truly grateful for your support, your advice, your insight. And yes, this is definitely something that we all need to stay very well tuned into. And it applies to immigration, but also there's tax in there as well. And we're now going to be moving on. And we are super delighted that, as ever, we have backstage Julie Barron from Vialto Partners, who's going to give us our tax update. So everybody, you know how it works. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button. A big thank you to Julia Onslow-Cole, and a welcome to our stage to Julie Barron. Julie, how are you doing?
All right. How are you, Brian?
I am very good. And yeah, you're talking about Russia. It's a big one. So
yeah. So Julie and I combined our efforts here today. So very exciting.
Yeah.
So there's been some tax changes in Russia. Yeah. So last summer in July, Russia announced tax increases for their tax rates. Now, historically, Russian tax rates have been 13 or 15%, depending on the type of income. So a nice low rate. But obviously, they've got a budget deficit and they need to get some extra funds. They've been spending a lot of money. And so they have increased the rates starting on January 1st, 2025. So we are currently in these new rates. Now, I will say that these rates only apply to residents. Non-residents of Russia have always paid a 30% tax rate, and that continues. So these are for residents. But the new rates go from a low of 13 still, but to a high of 22. So it's quite an increase to go from 13 to 22 on your compensation. And then on special types of income like dividends and capital gains, they have a rate of either 13 or 15. So the rates on that income does remain low. However, on compensation income, it is quite high now, 22%. So as Julia mentioned, if people are thinking about sending expats back into Russia, they're going to look at a lot higher tax costs than they did previously. When they were paying 13, now they're going to be paying 22. The other big change.
Are there many people working? I know people might come if peace breaks out, but and Russia comes in from the cold. But are there people working in Russia at the moment, expats out there?
There are. I was surprised. I kind of did a little bit of a non-scientific survey of people and said, hey, do you have expats that you're working with who are in Russia? And absolutely, there are still expats in Russia. I think, some of the food companies and companies like that are still have people there in Russia. So interestingly enough, there was more than I thought there would be. But yeah, so because of all of the geopolitical things, a lot of the tax treaties have been changed with Russia. So some treaties have just been canceled altogether. Some treaties have been amended. And what that means for global mobility professionals is that where a tax treaty may have previously had an exemption for non-residents who earned income in Russia. So let's say you had someone who was living and working in Russia, but then left, a lot of times you could exempt any trailing liabilities from Russian tax. So you didn't have to worry about that once they left. But because some of these tax treaties have now been canceled or amended, that income comes back into play and could be subject to Russian tax now in 2025. So companies really need to look at, did they have people who were previously living in Russia and maybe they thought they would not have a trailing liability, but now they would. The other changes for dividends. So a lot of countries, and I'm going to use the US as an example, had a tax advantageous rate on things like dividends. So if you were a Russian resident and you had US dividends, you only paid a 10% rate. Well, now that treaty has changed, you now pay a 30% rate. And your Russian rate is only 15. So now you went from paying a 15% rate to a 30% rate. And what remains to be seen is whether Russia will honor that tax credit for up to 15%, because previously they did get to tax you at 5. They gave you a credit for the 10 that you paid for the US, and then they got 5% of your dividends. So the question will be, will they be compliant and allow a credit for a full 15% against the Russian rate? Or would you end up paying 30 plus 15, which would then obviously be a 45% rate on dividends? So more to come on that. But I think it's interesting that, yes, there are still expats in Russia, and it looks like we may see more in the future, but it's going to cost more money.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I mean, there's no doubt that the world is changing at the rate, probably so fast, the rate at which the world is spinning right now. And it always, somehow, it comes back to us in global mobility that, when the world changes, people move, trade moves, and somehow it then links back to immigration and to tax, and indeed to all the HR and logistical aspects and technology aspects of moving people around the world. So, Julie, thank you so much for that. Really, really appreciate it. We're now going to move on. I'm delighted to be welcoming onto the stage Cara Butler from Benevo, who's going to be sharing some stuff about a really exciting bit of immigration management technology. We've talked about it before on the show, but we wanted to talk about it a bit today as the show is so focused on everything that's going on, especially around the geopolitical world and what's going on around immigration. So everybody, without further ado, hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's say a big, big thank you to Julie Barron, and welcome onto our stage, Cara Butler. Hey, Cara, where are you today?
Hey, Brian, I'm in Houston, where it's chilly. It's very chilly today.
I don't expect that, but I always think of Houston being warm. Anyway, Cara, tell us what you're going to be talking about today. Tell us a bit about this immigration hub.
Yes, I wanted to take the time today, and keeping in theme with our show, to talk a little bit more about the Immigration Management Hub and how it's helping companies streamline their immigration processes for cases that are not attached to an assignment. So for immigration-only cases. And so for those managing immigration cases manually, whether that means spreadsheets, emails, or multiple disconnected systems, everybody knows how frustrating that can be. So the Immigration Management Hub changes that by bringing everything into one centralized platform, and that works with any immigration provider or HR system. So one of the biggest challenges in immigration management is keeping track of all of those multiple moving parts, and different visa types, expiration dates, approvals, provider communications, and so forth. With the Immigration Management Hub, instead of juggling tools, everything is tracked in one place, and that means real-time status updates from every case, a secure way to store and share documents, and also a clear record of every step in the process, being able to track all of those steps. But it's not just about keeping organized, it's also about planning ahead, as you know. So the platform provides cost forecasting and actual spend tracking. So you always have a very clear picture of what your immigration program looks like financially. And you can also monitor performance, provider performance. So, being able to ensure that you're working with the best providers and making sure that they're on track with everything. But just if you haven't seen a demo, we'd love to give you a demo of the platform if you're interested in seeing that. So just reach out. We'd love to show you how it can transform your immigration program. And also, Tally is going to put a link in the chat room shortly to get more information.
Right now.
There it is.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Okay. So, Cara, thank you so much. And obviously, managing immigration is the theme of today, and it's such an important bit of technology assistance. We're now going to be moving on, and we're going to be talking about managing immigration in the new environment. And we've got not one, not two, but three experts waiting backstage to join us. We've got Devika Bagwandas from H&M. We've got Nicole Younes from Kroll. And we've got Eddie Riley from Fragment. So you are in for a treat if you're interested, and you should be interested in what's going on with immigration in the new environment. So everybody, you know how it works. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button. Let's say a big thank you to Cara Butler, and welcome to our stage, Devika, Nicole, and Eddie. Hi, Devika, Nicole, Eddie. It's so great to have you here on the show. I'm super excited. This is just such an important and topical subject. But let's start off with the introduction, shall we? So I'll start with you, Nicole. Tell us a bit about yourself and Kroll.
I'm Nicole Younes. I'm based out of the Chicago area. I work for Kroll. They're a risk and financial advisory firm headquartered in New York, but they have offices all over the world.
Okay. And roughly speaking, how many people do you have on visas around the world?
Globally, we have over 400 individuals on visas. Our program in the U.S. is a little bit smaller than 100.
Cool. Okay. So very big welcome. So presume it's cold where you are up in Chicagoland?
A bit.
Yeah. Okay. And then Devika, so you're with H&M. Tell us a bit about yourself and your company.
Hi, Brian. Sure. So my name is Devika Bagwandas. I'm the Regional Global Mobility Manager for H&M. I manage the global mobility and immigration for the US, Canada, Mexico, and some of our LATAM regions. And I'm out here in freezing New Jersey. It's been really cold recently.
Okay. And for anybody who doesn't know H&M.
Yes. So I can't imagine no one doesn't know about H&M.
Got to ask the question.
Yeah. So I'm based out of our New York City offices, but also work out of our New Jersey office. That's where I am today. But as you know, H&M is a global retailer headquartered in Stockholm, Sweden. And in the US, I manage a program of about 80 to 100 immigration cases, but globally we have a few hundred.
Cool. Okay. And you've got stores all over apart from the head office, you've got stores all over the US and indeed around the world.
Yes, we have stores all over the US and around the world.
Okay. And Eddie, I think everybody on this call knows Fragment, because obviously we have somebody from Fragment on every week telling us a bit about immigration, Julie Onslow Cole or one of her colleagues. But Eddie, tell us about your role in Fragment, because you've got a very unique role, haven't you?
I do. So I manage the enforcement defense team. I work out of Washington, but we have a nationwide practice throughout the United States defending companies when they get crosswise with the government. But primarily what we do in this space is help companies build compliance programs and understand their compliance obligations to remain on the right side of the government.
Okay. And how's it been reacting at the moment? Obviously, we're seeing massive changes going on, some of which are sort of coming to fruition, some of which are being stymied a bit in the courts. But Eddie, from your perspective, I mean, is everybody sort of beetling around, sort of trying to work out what's going on, or what's the state of play out there?
Yeah, things are moving quickly. I think that's probably one of the biggest features of the new administration is the speed at which it moves, and some of the confusion that comes with that speed, I think, is not a bug of the system, but a feature of it, and is intended to create certain disruption and to get new messages out there from the administration. That's certainly something that we're seeing. Most companies are monitoring the situation very closely. I spend much of my day giving advice and talking to companies on how to be prepared for these types of things, and what does it mean? What have we seen? What do we expect to see in the future? So I think that people are both wondering about the future as well as thinking already about some of the actions that have taken place.
Okay, now with you, Devika, you've got a lot of visa holders in your organization at all levels. What sort of responses have you been seeing from people on the ground in terms of concern or need for knowledge about what's going on? What's been the reaction on the ground?
So there hasn't really been a major impact to our program, Brian, but one of the things, or two of the things I did do is I organized an immigration briefing session for our senior leadership in partnership with our immigration vendor back in December. And then just 2 weeks ago, I also conducted an immigration information separate session with all of our employees on a work visa. And that was very well received, while no one really had any major concerns because we're not really seeing a lot of impact right now. I did really wanted to prepare them and give them updates on what to potentially expect. And so the feedback I shared was really very well received, just talking about various things they've been hearing in the news about stricter vetting, being more prepared when they travel and return to the U.S., being more prepared for longer visa wait times at the embassies and consulates abroad. So that went very well. And then we had a session for Q&A, and they had some really good questions, which I was able to answer. So I think, just wanting to prepare them more now that everybody's more aware. But for the most part, things are still fairly quiet.
So how many people would have been on these? You ran a webinar for people. I mean,
Yes.
How many people were you dealing with on your webinar, trying to find out? They were asking questions about what was going on.
So out of about 80, close to 80 participants who were invited, about 50 something plus attended.
Okay, so quite a high level.
Yeah, quite a high level.
Okay, and Nicole, from your point of view, I expect you've got quite a different workforce to the workforce that H&M have. But what are you seeing, within your company, sort of the reaction or the concern, or if you like, preemptive steps that people are taking at the moment?
I haven't seen too much expressed concern directly from visa subject employees yet in the United States. It's been mostly based around travel, international travel, either for personal or business purposes, making sure that we're having the conversations, that they're carrying all the documents that they absolutely need to have on them, but as well as recommended documentation, and kind of coaching them through questions that they might be asked and how they should answer it if it comes up, just so they feel at ease. The bigger conversation has really been with the HR business partners about initiating non-immigrant extensions and U.S. permanent residency cases in even more advance than we typically would be, just because processing times are creeping up more and more.
You mentioned processing times, actually. We ran a poll during the week on LinkedIn, and this was the question we asked. We said, U.S. immigration is getting harder. What is the biggest challenge you're seeing on a day-to-day basis? And for those of you in the audience, here's 4 choices. You can either say the biggest challenge we're facing is it's harder for people to qualify for visas, or you can say it's longer processing times, or you can say actually the major concern of border checks. And then the last one is increased compliance. And I put raids there, but maybe raids and site visits. So just sticking with you, Nicole, what are you seeing there? What would you say is the biggest challenge that you are seeing? And whilst Nicole's answering, out in the audience, also feed in your comments into the comments box on LinkedIn.
The biggest challenge that I'm seeing is increased processing times. I mean, we are starting to have the conversations internally about initiating extensions. What might have been 6 months prior, where we're already looking at fall cases. And Devika, I know that we were talking earlier, you guys are kind of looking at the same thing. Green card cases, I mean, it used to be maybe 24 months out prior to a max out, we would do that. And then it became 30 months. And now we're really looking at the 3-year mark.
Okay, so far we've had Ferzine and Stephanie were saying, and Kristen was saying they're seeing longer processing times, and then Angela was saying also increased compliance. Devika, what are you seeing from your perspective at H&M?
Yeah, so similar to Nicole, we're also starting to prepare for renewals much more in advance, 8 to 9 months out. We don't really have many cases that are filed with UCIS because most of our population apply for renewals abroad. So right now we're starting to see challenges with longer visa wait times. So we're starting to prepare for that and started to plan ahead. If we have new transferees coming into the US, we're working with all of the businesses to let them know that these processes are no longer going to be able to take, a few days or 1 to 2 weeks to get an interview appointment. It could potentially be longer. So be prepared for that. And then also in terms of stricter vetting, making sure colleagues or employees qualify for visas, making sure they're more prepared. When we start preparing with our law firms, we make sure that whether it's an L1A or an L1B, that there is it's a strong case, it's a strong argument for that visa, because we obviously don't want to send employees to the embassy or consulate with sort of a weak case and have it get rejected, knowing fully well now we're in this environment with stricter vetting. So that's what we're doing behind the scenes to prepare our employees, because that's where we can see potential challenges coming up.
I'm just wondering, and I'll throw this one to you, Eddie. Are we in a situation where it's almost like sort of, I don't know what the phrase is, but buy now while stocks last? That if you're eligible for a new class of visa, apply soon, because the rules might get tougher. We know processing times are getting longer, but do we think the rules to qualify for visas are likely to get tougher over the next 12 months, say?
Brian, I don't think we're going to see substantive changes in the requirements for the rules. And you're asking me if those rules will shift. What I think is likely to happen is that the burden to show that you're meeting the rule, how much evidence you're preparing, as Devika was saying, what we're looking at is this increasing burden on the company to show that the individual qualifies for the visa and that the company is also entitled for that visa category, and the tightening of those standards that can occur without formal changes to the rules is what I suspect. In fact, we did see at the end of the Biden administration, just 3 days before President Trump was inaugurated, the Biden administration had finalized a rule that tightened the standard for specialty occupation visas, what many people call the H-1B visa in the United States. And as to your question about is it processing time, stricter scrutiny? I think all these things are largely tied together, because as the government moves to stricter scrutiny, as they increase the border checks and as they increase fraud checks on the background of these benefit applications, we're just going to see longer and longer processing times. And so, all these things tie together to really lead to that concern that people are saying that they're seeing in terms of the longer processing times.
And looking out, I mean, over the next sort of 12 months or so, I mean, and we look at the way that the new administration is acting. Do you think that with headcount reductions, obviously being a very, very topical subject in the federal government, that there's going to be less agents to do the processing, and therefore processing is going to take longer? And the other side of that coin is also, we're well aware, of course, that Elon Musk is very heavily involved in things. Do we think that we're going to see more technology come in and maybe more AI-related checks on people, that way, which might actually go the other way in terms of making, the system more efficient? Which way do you think that might pan out?
I think in the next 12 months we're going to see we're in the next 12 months we're going to see greater delays. One, because of the cuts that you were referring to in terms of the federal workforce, but also people being redeployed to do other actions within the adjudication of the petition. So to look at it from a compliance perspective and not just an adjudications perspective. And then I think long term, upgrading the immigration agency's technology, that's been something that the immigration agency in the US has been after for a very long time. I think most people in the industry would say that that change would be very welcome. I think that in the short run, however, the change management for that would be cause more disruption than it would to than it will in the long run. Perhaps it would get more efficient, but I think in your question, the 12 months time frame, we're looking at longer times, not shorter.
Okay, and we've got a few questions that have come in. We'll take one first of all from Maya Helberg, and this is for you, Devika. She asks, for current employees who are facing extended processing times for renewals and who are not anticipating this, how is the business dealing with this population?
So as of now, we really haven't encountered any challenges, but for contingency planning, what we're looking at when I strategize the renewal, I look at the country where our employees are traveling to. And obviously, if we have a legal entity or an office there. So should any one of our employees go to that particular location and they're delayed during the visa processing, we have an office there and they can work from there. So that's what we're looking at. For the most part, most of our employees go back home to their home country, so that is in itself is a relief. So that's how we're working through it, and we're planning well in advance. So none of this, should happen. That's the reason we're planning. So none of it, comes up, in a shorter time frame. We're talking about it. We're strategizing about it well in advance before our employees actually travel, before they leave the U.S.
Okay, we've got another question come in. This is from Ferzine, who I'll put to you, Nicole, if I may. She says, how far in advance do you prepare for filing? Specifically, when can extension requests be submitted? For example, if the window is 90 days, but that delays impact outcomes, what's the best strategy?
So if we're talking, I think it's largely country specific. But if we're talking about the U.S. as an example, and we're looking at an H visa, so a specialty occupation visa, we can't file until the 6-month window. But internally, we would have the conversation maybe 8 months out, roughly, give or take, to make sure that we have the approvals in place to initiate that extension. And then we can start drafting in partnership with our vendor law firm, but we can't file until the 6-month mark. So we want to have it teed up as best as possible. So the moment we become eligible to file, we can do so. I don't think that we'd want to wait until the 90-day mark.
Yeah, so you're being prudent and saying we're going to allow for this is what the situation is, and processing times, if anything, might get longer. And I mean, I think we've answered this question, but I'll put it up here, Eddie, for you. Robert says, have hiring freezes and agency firing exacerbated the backlog? In other words, I might sort of tweak that question slightly and say, if it has, how much do you think it has been exacerbated by? If you look at it across your client base.
Yeah, so we haven't seen the effects of these yet. So remember that the petitions
still
that
early days, yeah. We're still in month one, aren't we?
We're still in month one, so we haven't seen it yet. But of course, less people doing the same amount of work is going to lead to exacerbated backlogs. And it's not just the hiring freezes or the firings. It's the redeployment of people who are working these jobs to do other functions within immigration enforcement. As I was mentioning to some folks earlier today, we have seen the movement of people within the Justice Department away from traditional immigration functions that help move the system along and into roles of conducting sanctuary city investigations. And so those internal transfers within the government are likely to impact things as well.
Okay, so just changing the subject slightly. I'm working in the US, let's say, and I'm on whatever, an H-1B visa, an L-1 visa, and I decide actually I'm going to leave the country either for a business trip or for vacation. I want to come back. what guidance are you giving me? And maybe I'll start with you, Devika. What guidance are you giving me in terms of what I should expect, both on the way out and on the way back as I cross a border out of or into the US?
Sure, Brian. So this is something I covered in the session I conducted 2 weeks ago. So take L1, for example. Making sure everyone has their endorsed I-129S, which is a document that the consular officer stamps and gives back to the employees when they apply for the initial L1. Making sure that
sorry, just take it one by one. So for people who don't know the document, how big is this document? What are we talking about?
Oh, it's a form, actually. It's called Form I-129S. It's part of an L1 visa application package. And when anyone is applying initially for an L1 visa, it's the form that gets stamped by the consular officers of the embassy. So there are usually 3 sets of those that are part of the L1 package. And the consular officer is supposed to take one. The employee keeps one, and when the employee is returning back to the U.S., usually the immigration officers at CBP should need to take one.
And so this is physical.
Yes, they're physical forms, right?
Electronically, so they've got to make sure it's in their hand luggage.
Yes, they're physical forms. And what had happened was in the previous administration, there was more of a laxed approach to, traveling with that each and every time. So you could travel and return and not be asked to produce it. Well, now that is changing, and that's what's all part of, the more intense scrutiny when you're arriving back into the US. So part of the guidance I've been giving is making sure you have this document with you every time you travel. And the question that always I get is, do I need to take it on every trip? Yes, take it every time, because you never know when you'll encounter that one immigration officer who will give you a really hard time because you don't have it. And then other things like making sure that passports are not expiring soon. I explained, what an I-94 is, making sure they're checking their I-94, which is their departure arrival document. It's a very small form with a very big meaning, very critical document. It's generated electronically every time somebody travels and returns to the US. What a lot of people don't know is that when your passport's expiring soon and you return to the US, it cuts off your I-94 expiration date, because your I-94 is tied to your passport expiration date. So that was a really key takeaway when I started explaining that. And after our session, we had quite a few employees who started checking their I-94s. So it was, I try to stress that they also need to be responsible for this. While we monitor it, they also need to know what this document means and how critical it is. So things like that. And then overall, if they're going, any other additional documents that may need for family members, making sure they have those with them. The question that we got was, do we need to take this, every time? And my answer was yes. Take it with you, because you never know when you'll encounter that, when you'll have, and there have been issues reported already when people are traveling and returning, facing officers who are questioning them more.
And obviously that's when they're crossing a border. What about if they're just traveling internally within the US, or just out and about for peace of mind or anything? Do you think people should be carrying documents with them that shows they've got legal status? Let's say they're going on holiday to Hawaii.
Internally, I haven't really received questions about that. It can be cumbersome to walk around with your H-1B document, your L1 document. But I think the I-94, because that's an electronic document, that's something, and you can print that from the government's website. That's something that if anyone is really concerned, I would recommend that they take that with them, because that shows their status, and it also has the expiration date tied to their whatever status they're in, whether it's H-1B or L1.
And Nicole, what are you seeing at Kroll? I know you're in the risk business, but what are you seeing about people being concerned about having the right documentation?
I haven't seen too much expressed concern, and our law firm does a fantastic job of, almost over communicating with employees to make sure that they have everything that's required when they're traveling internationally. Domestically, if you're traveling within the United States, you shouldn't require anything other than your passport, because you're not going through customs, you'd be going through TSA. But if you're traveling internationally, either for work or for business, like Devika said, you should be carrying the documents with you that might be requested. You'd rather have it, not need it, than need it, not have it. even if it's just a copy. But there hasn't been too much expressed concern with employees. It's mostly from a planning perspective. If they're traveling abroad for visa stamping purposes, making sure that they're abroad for a long enough time, factoring in, not only the appointment date, but then the passport processing, so it's available for pickup afterwards. Ideally planning it around when somebody is going, back home to visit family, or if they're going to be in a certain city for an extended period of time. And if need be, traveling to, a country that accepts third country nationals for visa appointments, but trying to plan it around your, your country of origin and you going back there.
Okay. And Eddie, from your perspective, what are you seeing? What's best practice?
Yeah, so best practice would be, Brian, to advise foreign nationals in the United States to carry with them documentation of their status. And it has been a long time since these laws have been enforced, but the Justice Department in the U.S. has ordered that immigration enforcement officers start to enforce the rules that require an individual to carry certain documentation with them. And as the both my co-panelists were here saying, an unexpired Form I-94, a passport admission stamp, a green card, an employment authorization document, or border crossing card for citizens of Canada or Mexico are all acceptable documents that the government will view as stating someone's lawful status in the U.S. And so it's become more important in this particular administration. We haven't seen the anxiety levels raise yet, but more than ever, we're seeing questions come up, and that's particularly true if someone is, say, traveling to San Diego for a vacation, because that's down near the border, and there's additional border checks within about 100 miles of the U.S. border. And so if someone's going to be visiting down there or otherwise is just out and about, I would think that the best practice would be to carry these documents, because there's actually a misdemeanor for failing to be able to produce certain documents.
Okay, I'm going to show my ignorance. Is that widely known that it's a misdemeanor not to carry the documents if you're just traveling around within the US?
I think
that, or is that sort of just one of those things that you think, it's a fact, but nobody bothers with it?
That's exactly it. It's a fact, and probably, and I don't want to speak for people. I think, as Nicole was saying, I think that immigration vendors do a very good job of advising foreign nationals of these obligations. But I do think it's something that for a long time people haven't focused on in terms of actually having them on their person. But I think this is a stated priority of the Trump Justice Department, and so I would advise people to abide by it. But I do think you're right that it's a statute that largely has gone unenforced. But the Trump administration has made clear that they're making it an enforcement priority.
And Devika, is that something that you were covering in your briefings, that people sort of, to make sure people got sort of the information they need when they go out and about?
Yeah, well, I certainly didn't share that it was a misdemeanor, but I think I would have created more questions.
You don't have to find any penalties for that misdemeanor.
But I think the messages I shared in the session were really about being more aware, because it's so easy to travel and return and not be scrutinized or questioned, which was happening in the previous administration, and just making sure that everybody's more educated about what's happening around them now, what's taking place in the environment, and be more prepared, making sure they're traveling with the necessary documents. And then, of course, if they have a doubt about something and they're not sure and they're leaving, come to us. Like, don't take anything for granted. Just come to us, reach out, ask the question. And then one of the things I stressed on is making sure they also read the materials they're receiving from our immigration law firm, which also does a great job of providing a lot of details in their application package. It's very easy to get those set of documents and kind of put them to the side. So I stress the need for them to really go over that and read it.
Okay, let's change the subject a little bit and talk about enforcement, which obviously Eddie is very much your bag. But before we get on to you, I just want to talk it from a practical point of view on the ground. So there are site visits and there are raids. And I appreciate there's a difference between the two. As I understand it, raids are pretty always by definition unannounced, but site visits will be planned. Nicole, from your perspective, you're in offices, so you're not sort of open to the public as such, whereas obviously H&M stores are open to the public. But Nicole, from your perspective, do you see site visits? Have you experienced site visits, and what should people be doing if they're preparing for a site visit?
So I have not seen a site visit within my current organization, but I have seen site visits before. It should be a relatively straightforward process. It should be something that's not scary, although it might sound scary. If your organization's documents are completely up to date and compliant, which they should be at all times, if somebody does stop by the office for a site visit, it should be a matter of contacting, the Global Mobility team or your U.S. Global Mobility contact, letting them know that there's a person in the office, and then producing the file for that given individual or individuals from that office, whoever the site visit is asking about.
Okay, and Devika, in your case, obviously you've got regional offices, but you've also got lots of stores where many people can just walk in. By definition. So how do you deal with site visits? And
so actually, currently at the moment, Brian, I'm working, I've partnered with our law firm to create a site visit protocol that I will be sharing with all of our front desk and office support teams, and training them on what to expect should an officer walk through the front door and wants to conduct a site visit. Now, the raids are completely different, and I'm also partnering with our law firm to create a protocol for should any raids occur in any of our stores. So that's something I will be conducting most likely by next week, the site visit protocol. And for the most part, like Nicole said, as long as you have all of your documents in order, I've actually dealt with site visit in previous organizations. And as long as you have all of your documents in order, you're compliant, which obviously companies are, and you give them everything that they ask for, most of the times, once they're satisfied, it's fine. It's a closed file. They close the case.
Okay, and Eddie, saving you for last here, is that you're on the sharp end of this in the enforcement office. Tell us what a raid is like and what happens there.
Yeah, so a raid is something, I've gotten this question a lot. If your premises gets raided, the simple answer is you're going to know, because the agents will be wearing their flak jackets with the letters on the back, and it will most likely be multi-agency. The agents will be armed, and they will have with them a search warrant, which allows them to enter the premises and take evidence of criminal wrongdoing with them. I think it's usually a large number of agents. In some cases, particularly in meatpacking plants during the last Trump administration, we saw the use of helicopters and things like that. So a raid is going to be something that's fairly obvious. And at the end of it, you're going to be on the phone with the legal counsel's office and dealing with legal counsel substantially.
Okay, we've only got about 5 minutes left, and there's quite a few subjects I want to cover. So I'm going to try and do them quickly and maybe ask each of you a bit about one of them. These are all words that people outside the US may have heard and not really understand what they are. And even in the US, if you're not in immigration, you may have heard the words but not quite know what they are. So let's see if we can just sort of explain a bit about what they are. I'll start with you, Devika. Birthright citizenship. What's that all about?
So birthright citizenship was just recently came about after the president was inaugurated to end the process of giving children U.S. citizenship if their mothers or the expected mothers to be were unlawfully present in the United States and the father is not a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. That process now has 4 judges have ruled against this. There's a temporary restraining order in the courts, and it's on hold. So as of now, nothing's really happening, but that's what really it is in a nutshell.
Okay, actually, I will bring Eddie in on that one. Is that is going through the courts. When it gets to the Supreme Court, if you were a betting man, do you think it's going to be upheld, or do you think the Supreme Court is going to throw it out?
I think that the Supreme Court is likely to find in favor of the traditional understanding of what the 14th Amendment says, and that birthright citizenship will be upheld, and the executive order redefining what citizenship means in the United States will be tossed.
Okay, next question to you, Nicole. So it's like a game show. DACA and Dreamers. Do you want to, these are terms that we hear. Do you want to just explain what that is?
Sure. So DACA or Dreamer, it stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It was something that President Obama had announced in the summer of 2012. And there was certain criteria that had to be met. So, if you entered the United States as a minor, prior to a certain time frame, and if you meet other qualifying criteria, then you could apply for DACA and then receive work authorization as well. So there's still some individuals in the United States who are working pursuant to DACA. There's not really a formal pathway yet. So any individual who's working for an organization as a DACA work authorization, card holder, you'd want to include them in the H-1B cap lottery to try and transition them to something more permanent, and then include them in the green card later on.
Okay, and the next one, I'll put it on to you, Eddie, is what's a sanctuary city, and are they going to survive?
So sanctuary city is a municipality or a local government in the U.S., and we actually have some states that have done this too, that have passed laws that make it either unlawful or interrupt the cooperation between municipal officers, including, for example, police officers and immigration enforcement officials, and making it more difficult for those agencies to work together to identify those here unlawfully, therefore providing them sanctuary or some peace of mind within those cities. The Trump administration is taking issue with that. The U.S. Constitution does contain something called the Supremacy Clause, that federal law sort of is the governing law of the country, and you can't have laws in conflict with it. I think some of these things are going to butt up against each other because there are also principles of, separate levels of government in the U.S. I do think that we're going to see some of the more significant protections in sanctuary cities dissipate over time, but I think sanctuary jurisdictions will likely remain, at least in name only, for sure.
Okay, and we've only got a minute left, but I'm going to leave that last minute to you, Devika. Laken Riley. Do what? You've got 60 seconds.
Sure. So I can speak really fast. So the Laken-Riley Act was the first law that was signed into bill by President Trump after he became president. And it was enacted because Laken-Riley was a student at the University of Georgia who was killed by an illegal migrant from Venezuela. So the law now allows for illegal immigrants who commit crimes to be detained and deported back to their home country.
Okay, in my understanding, that's the case.
And
before conviction, just if they're charged.
Yes, if they're charged of any, illegal activity, crime, assault on a police officer, drunk driving. And the first case actually, drunk driving was what killed Laken-Riley. And so a prosecutor in Indiana used the law for the very first time to detain and deport the illegal migrant that killed Laken-Riley.
Okay, so we are out of time. I'm going to bring back Cara Butler, Julie Barron, and of course our wonderful producer Tally. Julia couldn't be with us at this point, but thank you everybody. It's been a most insightful discussion, and as Harvey said, a very interesting show. Rob says very interesting show. It's a very interesting show, and we know that this is one that's going to run and run. We are back next week to talk about VIP mobility and how you marry high tech and high touch to create a wonderful experience for people who are moving in executive relocation. So all that really remains is for me to say thank you to Cara, to Julie, to Julia, to our very special guests, Eddie Riley, Nicole Yunez, and Devika Bandaras. Thank you so much. It's been a great week. We are back this time next week. So meanwhile, everybody, take care and have a great, great week. Goodbye.
Thank you, Brian.
Bye.